Let's talk about the moment. In this day and age, the documentary concert film is a staple of a pop star's album rollout cycle. But let's be honest, most are pretty predictable. The celebrity is struggling with something in their personal life, the rehearsals are difficult but rewarding, and the fans are so emotionally involved that they feel like family. These films have such a distinct formula that dozens of mockumentaries have been released over the years satirizing the format. But what's a little less common is to have an actual pop star get in on the joke themselves, which is why The Moment was such a welcome surprise. The movie starts off in September 2024, with Charli XCX preparing for her Brat arena tour, while her label is trying to capitalize on the album's cultural relevance with brand deals and a concert film. Although unsure about the decision, Charli agrees to the documentary as long as she can work with her creative director, Celeste. However, her label hires director Johannes Godwin for the job, but he decides to make the tour more generic and family-friendly, much to the chagrin of Charli and her friends. After Charli accidentally misrepresents Brat's promotion with a credit card company, her fans commit fraud and she's cancelled online. She apologizes to Celeste, but says she has to go through with Johannes' vision for the Brat tour anyway, hoping it'll finally put an end to the album cycle. I know that sounds really simple, but honestly, it's a simple movie, which makes sense considering the average concert film barely has a plot holding it all together. Even if you aren't familiar with Charli XCX or the Brat album, odds are you saw something that alluded to it, whether it was different brands poking fun at its lime green aesthetic or a viral dance on TikTok. Now, as someone who spent a good amount of time in the club in the early 2010s and was active on Tumblr during its glory days, I was pretty familiar with Charli XCX prior to the Brat album. I mean, fancy, boom clap, boys. So contrary to popular belief, she didn't just spawn out of nowhere in 2024, and I wish that the film had done a better job of making it clear how long she'd been grinding for. There's this assumption that if you're watching the movie, you already know who Charli XCX is, which is probably true, but that negligence causes issues down the road. Considering one of the key conflicts is how unprepared Charli is for her newfound fame and how desperate she is for it to never end, you kinda need to make it clear that she isn't new to the industry. This was her big break. Even a quick little montage sequence would have helped, and there's definitely enough archive footage of her on tiny stages to do it. Throughout the movie, she has dozens of people at her beck and call, all of whom she seems to know really well. But wouldn't it have been better if it was only her manager and creative director that had been with her from the very beginning? Then she'd feel even more anxious and alienated around these new faces. Plus, the pressure to make the Brat tour succeed wouldn't just be because of her own finances, but the responsibility she feels for all of these people's livelihoods. Brat was definitely one of the biggest moments of 2024, but it wasn't the only moment. And for a movie that acknowledges how quickly things lose relevancy in the digital age, I wish there'd been some more chronically online references, especially since they filmed it months after the events were meant to take place. They knew what happened in pop culture. I think it'd have been really funny if her management had talked about Mudeng, leading to a rant from Charli about having to compete with a hippo for attention. Everything about the moment is super timely, hence the name of the movie, and I think they needed to lean into those sort of brain rotisms. Now, this isn't the first time that Charli has played a fictionalized version of herself, having appeared in the TV series Overcompensating last year. As I was watching The Moment, I couldn't help but compare the two depictions, and if I'm being honest, I preferred the direction they went in for the show. A bitchy celebrity is nothing new, obviously, but because they committed to the bit, it was funny. In The Moment, it feels like they couldn't decide what aspects of Charli's personality to satirize. Sometimes she's the clueless pop star, sometimes she's the voice of reason. Like one moment she's asking her makeup artist not to get her sick, and then the next she's making her stylist delay his honeymoon for the second time. It's just not very consistent. If they were gonna have Charli make an entire speech about being a people pleaser and being concerned about not being relevant anymore, then they needed to lean into that. Not just making her a normal person who's sometimes nervous and sassy and bossy. That isn't interesting, or more importantly, funny. She either needed to be a total pushover the entire time, or she needed to be the only sane person in the room until she finally gave up. But as it stands, the emotional payoff isn't really there. But with all that said, I do think there was something really captivating about Charli on screen. Her dry British humor probably won't make you laugh out loud, but I found her endearing. What I was most impressed with were her vulnerable moments, the moments where she's just barely holding herself together, and you can really feel her slowly unravel as the movie progresses. So when she has her breakdown in the hotel, it feels not only earned, but perfectly anxiety-inducing. It's just unfortunate that the momentum kind of drops off from there. So when she makes her big apology at the very end, there isn't much of an emotional connection to it. It's pretty obvious that Charli is trying to make her way into the film business, but is opting for cool, psychological thrillers instead of the usual singer-turned-actress rom-coms or musicals, which is very on brand for her. At least her brand in the 2020s, because let's not forget, a decade ago she was voicing an angry bird. Aside from her stint on overcompensating, in 2025 she was also in 100 Nights of Hero and Eruptia, which she wrote and produced. And this year she'll be in I Want Your Sex, The Gallerist, and Faces of Death. She also worked on the soundtrack for Wuthering Heights, so safe to say, she's gotten Hollywood's attention. There are a handful of references throughout the movie about Charli's insecurities about her age and appearance, and I think they did a good job of addressing the absurd expectations society has of women, but in a way that doesn't feel preachy. Take, for instance, the conversation with the bus driver. She's doing her best to be polite to this man who has no idea who she is. Meanwhile, he's perfectly fine telling her to her face that she doesn't look like she did a decade ago. It's such a mortifying and frustrating situation that I feel like any woman can relate to. There's another moment where Charli has a mild panic attack after being told by a facialist that she looks old and needs to start planning for her future. Ironically enough, Charli was hit with similar comments while doing press for the movie. While on the Smartlist podcast, she was asked if she wanted kids, to which she replied, no. The male hosts then said, well, maybe you'll change your mind if you meet the right guy. Ignoring the fact that Charli is already married, why is that even a comment they felt comfortable making? She's only 33 years old and at the height of her fame. Why is the public's instinct to tell her to slow down and pop out some kids? I'm sure you've come across the recent discourse where today's teens genuinely think that 30 is geriatric, and I think it would have been interesting to see that discussed in the moment. Most of the time in the movie, it's older people making comments about Charli's appearance, but it would have been funny to see some of her fans say the same disrespectful things, but with the best intentions. Like a 14-year-old saying, oh my god, who did your Botox? It looks so good. Speaking of which, I wish there'd been more interactions with her fans in general, because if I recall correctly, I think she only talks to them once at a meet and greet. There is a lot more focus on the press side of things, like appearing on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and filming a What's in My Bag for Vogue. How can you fully highlight how famous she and Brat are if you're not showing the pandemonium surrounding her? I mean, she even goes to a party at one point, and everyone is kind of minding their business and leaving her alone. Why not use that as another anxiety-inducing moment for her? Have her literally have to run from the party only to be hassled by her Uber driver, forcing her to perform as a 365 party girl even when she doesn't want to. I also think it's strange how removed the movie feels from the music industry. I'm not saying they needed Billie Eilish, Troye Sivan, and Addison Rae to make cameos, but I do think that it's a bit of a disservice to the impact the Brat album had on the industry at large. Just think about all the electropop albums that came out the year afterwards, or all of the music videos that have the exact same aesthetic. I'm not saying that the appearances of Gen Z approved it girls like Rachel Sennett, Kylie Jenner, and Julia Fox didn't work, but a cameo from a Paul McCartney or Tom Jones type could have been interesting. Maybe giving Charli some much needed advice that she just brushes aside because they're chopped and unk. One of the highlights of the film for me was Alexander Skarsgård, who is giving 110%. Johannes is the type of guy I've bumped into 1,000 times. He initially comes across as charming and friendly, if a little unnerving, but it's just a cover for his narcissism, and he absolutely will not take no for an answer. It might have been a little Black Mirror-y, but with AI being pushed into the entertainment industry, it could have been interesting to see Johannes use it to further his agenda even more. Maybe making deep-faked videos of Charli because she's been so uncooperative. There's also this recurring bit where it's suggested that Johannes' family fled South Africa at the end of apartheid, and I love how it adds even more levels to his white guy entitlement. I also can't help but wonder if that was supposed to be a reference to Elon Musk, who was also born in South Africa. And the two have a very similar brand of wannabe cool that is just insufferable. I've seen some people say that the end of the movie where Charli agrees to sell out and do Johannes' generic concert is a dig at Taylor Swift, but I'm not sure if I agree. Sure, she's got the sparkly boots, the bedazzled microphone, the light-up wristbands, and the big confetti finale. But I'd argue that a lot of those motifs are popular throughout the pop space, and I could see similarities to Beyoncé, Ariana Grande, and Coldplay, which the movie does mention. Although the moment was marketed as a mockumentary, I'd argue that it's just a stylized dramedy. Although it looks really good, the handheld camcorder format with aggressive zooms doesn't actually add anything to the story. Much like other aspects of the plot, they don't fully commit to it, which makes it kinda awkward. Every so often, someone will glance at the camera, but the only time it actually matters is when Rachel notices it in the bathroom when they're all doing drugs, which yes, is a funny moment, but the rest of the time you're just wondering, why are you here? I really think they needed to introduce the cameraman, like they're a friend of Charli's or something. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense for them to be following her everywhere, especially when she didn't want to do a documentary to begin with. Because the mockumentary style lends itself to a more casual dress code, the fashion isn't exactly a highlight, but there are a handful of moments that I think are good representations of subversive 2024 style, like the Alexander McQueen skull scarf, the micro mini bubble skirt, and the viral Protect the Dolls t-shirt. I will admit that I don't really understand the choice to release the moment in theaters, because it definitely feels like a format that would work better for streaming, especially considering the whole point of the movie is to make fun of generic concert films. By waiting for a theatrical release, it created a pretty notable delay between the Brat hype and the movie. And while you could say that's an attempt to drive home the film's message and function as an official goodbye to Charli's Brat era, in practice, it feels about 8 months too late. Did I prefer the moment to the usual celebrity concert movie? Absolutely. But stacked up against other mockumentaries set in the music industry like Nowhere In, Brothers of the Head, or Hardcore Logo, it falls flat. What did you think of the moment? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!